Joining me now for a closer look at that market action is Viv Govendor from Rand Swiss Offshore. Viv, always a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Viv, it looks like just bleak sentiment all around, actually falling from the US markets yesterday and evidence today in the local markets. Keen to understand what markets are contending with this afternoon.
Well, in the US, we've had the pullback of NVIDIA. I think it's the biggest three-day fall in dollar terms of any company in history. It's approaching, I think, $400 or $500 billion in 3 days. Okay, it's not like it's fallen out of bed because this was a $300+ billion company. It was the most valuable company also virtually in human history. So it's not a huge percentage move, like a record percentage move. But in dollar terms, it's a big dollar move. And if you look at just the percentage of the total S&P 500 gain over the last a few months, basically the year to date, that has been due to NVIDIA, it's a substantial portion due to one company. So obviously that affects things. In Europe, we have a lot of uncertainty over the next week. If we think our elections are bad with the GNU, you have not seen what the French elections look like.
Yeah.
And surprisingly enough, and I thought this would have been a boring story, and I did a report at the start of the year about the UK election, saying it was a simple thing. Labour's going to win, the Conservatives are going to lose, Labour government, that kind of thing. It turns out that that's correct, but Nigel Farage, who's a very right-wing person, very anti-immigrant, appears to be beating the Conservative Party in the latest polls. It would be, for instance, imagine if the PAC had overtaken the DA to be the next opposition party to the ANC. It's that big a deal. Mm-hmm. In fact, bigger because I think the UK two parties, the Conservatives and Labour, have been those two big parties for like 100 years. So this would be a mess turnaround. So yeah, a lot of uncertainty, I think, happening globally as well.
Can you actually then also touch on maybe what we spoke about with NVIDIA, Viv? Do we know why we are seeing, the sell-off? Is it a matter of correction? Is it based on the share split there with NVIDIA? What is the story there exactly?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, the share price has been absolutely insane. Even after this fall, NVIDIA is still, I think, the second best performing stock of the S&P 500 for the year. So even after falling, but the most dollar amount in 3 days, it's still the best performing stock of the S&P 500. The thing is, I think people are unsure about the actual future of AI. Everybody seems to think it's the next big thing, and I think maybe there's a strong argument with that. But you don't know exactly what is going to be the pathway, who's going to make the money from this thing. If you look back, the example people often give is Cisco around the internet, revolution at the start of the 2000s, end of the 1990s. And at that time, Cisco also had a similar kind of path line before falling, dramatically thereafter, as people realized the money was not going to be made at the hardware level, but at places like Facebook and Google and so on. And this could be true here. I think the difference with NVIDIA and Cisco is that Cisco is making more of a commoditized item, whereas NVIDIA's item, which was products, its chips, etc., seem to be the best in the world at the moment. And in fact, they are so good that even a country like China, forget about a single company out there, a country like China can't get within, I think, 18 months of NVIDIA's products at the moment. So that's obviously something to be, a bit of a motive on the company.
Then in company news today, Viv, I keen to get your thoughts on Brait. We know that recapitalization is, imminent there, but I think what's also important is the fact that just generally, as a holdco, the companies seems to be battling with that NAV falling quite a bit. But also the assets within their Virgin Active new look, not sure what to make of them and their ability to deliver future value for their shareholders.
Yeah, look, we have these kind of, situations where a company has to have recapitalization, tries to, reduce debt and, try and get things working again. I think it's basically, obviously, it's your view on the plan going forward that matters more than anything else. And, I don't know exactly how to look at that here. If you look at some of the holdings this company has, which is like Virgin, etc., if the economy of the country improves, the GNU works out, you'll have more disposable income, things look a bit better. If it's not the case, then we obviously have to have trouble going forward for any company that's facing the consumer. At the same time, also with regards to things like premium foods and so on, I do think that, again, it's really a factor of what underlying stuff in the economy looks like, going forward, as opposed to just looking at what the company's plans are. But the company's plans are also important in this case. And you need to believe in them, both the forward-looking, prospects of the country, as well as the plans as well that are being put forward.
speaking about that GNU, that ran at 1818. Actually, we've seen it there, even without elections really coming into play. Viv, are we still considering this to be reasonably strong?
Yeah, look, it's definitely reasonably strong compared to it's been in 1818, but not for a while. And not for a while before the elections. I mean, there was a part last year where we got to 17 some change, but generally we've been hovering between 1850 and about just under 1950, and that's been kind of the trend for the last almost year or so. The fact that we broke through that trend and even broke through 18 before we started getting all this news about the uncertainty about whether or not the GNU was going to succeed or not. I think that's what the issue is. Had we had, confirmation of our cabinet about an agreement being made and whatever the agreement about, ministers and chairs, in the cabinet is going to be, I think just the fact that we had a GNU just announced and it's confirmed and implemented, I think would have been a big boost for the currency. And I think the fact that we are not that strong at the moment is just because of the uncertainty.
Let's talk also on Exxaro. They've gone on to say that their total coal production and sales volume for the first half are expected to fall by 14% and 12% respectively. It's not too far off from Thungela's story as well. It just looks like the coal price are really bottoming out, I think, at this time, based on the commodities cycle. And I guess we're just not going to see that boom that we saw coming from Europe a few years ago again for coal.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I've just been looking at some data around AI and going forward, and you'd be amazed at the amount of power that's been demanded by AI in these places. I mean, we're talking about apparently people are rumoring that there's like a 5 gigawatt, data center being, planned. 5 gigawatts is 4 nuclear power plants or 5 nuclear power plants, around about that amount of power plants for one data center. Places like Ireland are projecting to have a third of their power going towards these data centers. Even in the US, I think by 2030, it'll be something like about 8 to 10% of all the power in the US going towards data centers. And what that means is that a lot of stuff around renewables, around closing down these coal factories, etc., coal power plants might be delayed. If you cannot be able to build new things like nuclear the next, say, 5-6 years to power these things, so you maybe delay some of the reduction in coal. So I think some of the prospects for coal and some other fossil fuels might look more attractive than you think, just because of this excess new demand coming about around the AI ecosystem.
With that said, Viv, I'm keen to get your stock pick, but first I'd like us to reflect on counters that have found favor with your industry peers.
I think I do want to highlight that this business does look very, very attractive. So I alluded to the e-commerce component. So it was the Tencent. They delivered very good results, update recently. We think their fundamental growth rate still looks very, very attractive. There is still lots of monetization opportunities within there, a lot of associate stakes, business they own there that they can actually look to unbundle or sell. We think hopefully the regulatory environment is not as severe as it was over the last few years, and that will also boost further growth for them. And then of course you've got a share buyback component in that obviously adds a lot of value in our views.
To go with African Rainbow Capital, and ironically, it's almost a similar theme to what Alex is saying. If you look at African Rainbow Capital, it's trading at, call it, about half of its net asset value. The market obviously very worried about the rain valuation, or I think they're worried about the rain valuation. But, in a roundabout way, although they've got a big financial services component, I would argue that Time Bank is almost more of a technology play or a fintech play than it is a financial services play. It could be a unicorn in its own right. So I think there are lots of parts of this business that are looking a lot better if you just look at things like Alex Forbes, for example. So, what I'm saying is I think you've got some really good assets, and you've got other assets that are really exciting.
I'm going to go for Louis Vuitton, LVMH. Now, they've been under a bit of pressure in the past couple of weeks, and I think a lot of that has been linked to what's been going on in France, just in terms of the election. They'll be heading to vote next week, as far as I'm aware. But I think what's been a bit of a surprise here is that Miss Marine Le Pen's right-wing party seems to be leading the voting in most of the polls. So we've seen a little bit of softness in the broader European market. I think that was really just a bit unexpected, and that's why we're seeing the softness there. It does look sort of like with us, we'll see some form of coalition there. But I think, this is all to say that, leading up to those elections, we've actually got, perhaps a decent entry point here now. So I keep going on about tech. I think most weeks I'll come on and pick some sort of stock pick, because the world is changing. You've got to change with it. You've got to pick companies sort of at the forefront. But in many ways, loads of things also remain the same. And one of those things is the luxury sector.
All right, Viv, keen to get your thoughts on some of those counters, LVMH, ARC, and Naspers process.
Look, I mean, with LVMH, I think the amazing thing about the Europeans is that the fact that they've been able to export their luxury culture around the world. So you go to China, you go to India, you go to South Africa, and people even in all those places think that the bags made by these guys and the clothes made by these guys and the pens and whatever watches they make and the perfumes and so on are the best in the world. And that kind of motive is obviously been very powerful for them going forward. Obviously vulnerable to change in terms of what might be happening in terms of global taste changes, but incredible market achievement. Let me say that. With regards to Naspers process, I mean, the situation, obviously, looking at other stuff has been positive for the company, but it still remains a Chinese Tencent-dominated, investment. If you're looking at that, outlook, and at the moment, actually, the Chinese tech sector seems to still be cheap, considering some of the growth in revenue that has not been reflected in the changing share prices, especially among things like Tencent, like I said, Alibaba as well, Baidu even to a certain extent over the last few years.
Well, that's it, Viv. Which counter are you having this afternoon?
I'm looking at Novartis. It's a drug maker. I think that if you're looking at some of the latest developments coming out, with like the GLP-1s, etc., which is these drugs that make things like Wegovy, Mounjaro, and so on, we've seen a big upswing in terms of these lifestyle kind of drugs, things for weight loss and so on. Also, things that are being developed for Alzheimer's going forward. I do think that if you're looking at this kind of developments, you want to look at companies that have the best tech, partnerships out there. And Novartis has had a deal with Google over the last little while, Alphabet, for their isomorphic labs, and I think that's going to be bearing fruit going forward. So my pick at the moment is Novartis.
Brilliant, Viv. Always a pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much for your time today. That was your midday markets update with Viv Govendor from Rand Swiss Offshore.